I'm here with Rob Wainwright, Director of Europol, Europe's law enforcement agency. Terrorism is on everyone's mind. You are a clearinghouse for sharing information on terrorism. Tell us, what are the threats that you're looking at most for the coming year?
Well, of course, we've really had a tough time in Europe over the last 2 years. Multiple attacks, most recently in Berlin. What we're concerned, and as Berlin shows especially, is whereas ISIS, I think, still have perhaps a capacity to mount spectacular network-style operations, actually it's the lone actor. It's those that can have their minds turned by this ugly propaganda that ISIS put out, are capable of picking up a truck, as we saw in Nice, as we saw in Berlin, for devastating consequences. And the suspects involved are part of a very large community of highly radicalized individuals who are capable of doing that, and it gives us enormous challenges in the law enforcement security world around identifying where the next attack might come from.
And across 28 nations, that's got to be a challenge. We've seen people slip across borders, fall through the cracks. What can be done to address that?
Well, I think the impact of the attacks in Paris were important. It was, to a certain extent, a seminal moment for our community. And I've seen at Europol significant increases in intelligence sharing since then, much greater investment, not just in cooperation across borders, but in using our capacity to monitor how these terrorist actors are operating on the online space, for example. We see them pumping out this propaganda, using it as a communication tool in around 90 social media platforms. But we're getting a handle on that, and we're using our ability to track terrorist finance, terrorist firearms as well, and through the work of Europol supporting around 80 operations last year. So, we're on top of this to a large extent, and certainly most attempted terrorist attacks are stopped. Very good work by the national authorities. Unfortunately, we can't get the threat down to zero, and we get, unfortunately, incidents as we saw in Berlin.
And one of the things you try to rein in is that terrorist propaganda on the internet. Have you had success in your cooperation with tech companies in down?
Yes, mostly. I think most of the major ones are working with us in a very constructive way. We are referring thousands of accounts that we are interested in to these social media platforms. They then take the decision whether or not to take them offline, and they're doing that in about 90% of the cases of our referrals. So that's obviously a success story. The sort of online world has become part of the front line, actually, in fighting terrorism. That's what we recognize, and that's why we have to really redouble our efforts in this space.